Hi, everybody.
Welcome back, guys.
So-
We've got a special setup today. We're going to do, is this the brief one?
Yeah, okay, so we're going to change the podcast format. We heard you when we said there was too many of them, so we decided to make even more.
Yeah.
So that was mostly my choice, so because I listened to you people.
Well, here's the thing Julien likes to do. If Julien messaged me yesterday, I'll tell this story. How about this?
Sure.
This is what he's doing to you is what he does to me. Megan and I
he gets it worse.
Megan and I went out a couple days ago. Lincoln stayed with Julien, so we had the place for ourselves. Very nice evening out, had some drinks. But yesterday morning, not feeling so good. Julien's messaging
Bad
me
choice.
with like really deep stuff and
Yeah.
really good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's
so good.
that I didn't address until today. This
Yeah,
morning I got up
exactly.
and did that.
Yeah.
But I'll be God.
Yeah,
I told Julien, I said, man, I am way too hungover for this level of science today. To which he continues to hammer
Yes.
me with it. And
So
to the point where he said, maybe we should podcast today just so I can nail you.
that was just, I was making fun of the situation. But yeah, I did say like it'd be funny to podcast today on this subject. So, but the point was, it is true that sometimes we go an hour and a half, that it seems to be too long for most people because the subjects are so heavy that I don't think people can listen to that shit for that long. Yes. But there's also the fact that sometimes I've noticed we jump from subject to subject.
Yes, some of them often sometimes become 40% one subject, 60
Right.
the other, or
And
70,
so
30.
that makes it a bitch to know what the podcast is about, since it's not about one thing. And also, if people are tired after 30 minutes, they might enjoy the second subject, but they'll never get to it.
Yeah.
They would have to come back.
What's really funny is it's also really difficult to find after the fact.
Right.
Even if you
I
ask
don't
me,
know. Yeah, I
hey,
have
which
no idea.
episode
Yep.
did we talk about that? And the problem is I always find like, yeah, I don't know. Because if it was the one that was only 40% of the episode, it's
Right,
not in the title.
exactly, right.
Because it kind of titled the
So,
thing
because
whatever.
I was looking for some stuff the other day and I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Even me, I was like, I have no idea. And looking at the titles and even by date, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do instead is we'll do a subject. That subject might take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then that'll be the podcast. So what we'll do is we'll post every day. Oh, so twice a week.
Whoa!
Twice a week was not enough. Now you're going to get it every day. But some podcasts will be 10 minutes long.
Yeah. So if in a week we film a couple episodes and they end up being kind of 3 subjects each,
Yeah.
there'll be kind of 6 things that'll roll out that week.
Yeah.
However, if the subjects we're interested in
It'll be
are
twice.
only 2 that are an hour long, that's what it'll be. But we are going to try to be more concise
Yeah.
in the subjects.
But at the same time,
just so you're not having to digest one thing and then another different
right.
thing.
But at
in
the same time, we
sitting.
have to stay current with all our stuff, which is part of the issue
Yeah.
too. So we'll never let more than 4 or 5 get away from us.
No.
If we have more, then we post more. If you
Yeah.
can't take it, suck it up.
Yeah, basically the only gap we can live with is about a week or 2. A week and a half is about the most I can live with.
Even
yeah.
if we go on vacation, it'll
Yeah.
be like, we go back because we have to stay current. Like, how can I?
What's
like,
weird is that's not even for them. That's kind of for us. Mostly.
for us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's not for you guys.
I don't like living in the past like that. I was like,
No, I don't want to wait for some of the subjects.
Yeah, because we want to talk about it. You want to get it out, and then by the time it comes out in the public, and if we've been sitting on it for when I was traveling from Austria, it's like 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yes, right.
So-
Yeah, and some of that stuff is way too important.
Yeah.
Like today.
But the problem is you move so fast that 4 weeks in the future, you're onto something equally interesting.
Oh, fuck me.
I'm now 4 weeks bored with the last subject.
Yes,
And
exactly.
everyone else is excited about 4 weeks ago
Yeah,
stuff.
and that one is
Yeah.
that one.
So it's a gap in the connection with you guys that we're trying to just narrow up a little
So
bit.
that's why you'll end up with way more podcasts. There you go. I've heard you.
But they should be shorter. Some.
Yeah, exactly.
Some.
So it should be easier to listen to
Yeah.
because you should know exactly what you get into.
Yeah.
Right, so today, why is it important? That one closes... That one gives me a strange feeling. I have the same feeling that I have when I read What is Life by Schrödinger. It is that important of a thing. So this links the idea of Schrödinger, like entropy, so life fights death through, life fights entropy, so negative entropy stuff that have been talked about since the 40s, really. And then that just went away very strangely. There's an entire podcast we're going to do on science, the pharmaceutical industry.
World War I to World War II gap. It's really weird.
That 20s, 30s, man.
It's really actually like turn of the century to World War II.
Right,
is
but
a number.
the number of mistake that I saw in the stuff I was looking at is 1920 to 1930-ish.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. Like, the number of mistakes that have such an important, that changed the future of cell biology. Yeah. So you would think, right? By the way, all ended up in Nobel Prizes.
Yeah.
So it shaped the world of biology, which I find mind-blowing, especially when you like the history of science as much as I do, and you look at the scientific process at the time, and you go, wait. And that is because before I go into what it is, I want to explain also the problem with this. Is I'm going to talk about some people, but you have to understand that they were pioneers in their field who tried to dismantle sacred cows, things that were accepted as facts, just like lactate is a waste product. Like, it's still being fought. Like, I think wasted as lactate as fuel, I think it's more or less accepted now, but the glycolysis argument still isn't. It's still in textbook and everything. So that's been going on since 1920. I mean, and so they've been like Schur, they've been people like that. Brooks is the one, the lactate shuttle theory. They've been fighting it for 40 years to get it going. But so you see those people being attacked, like some of the one I'm going to talk today about, like, well, yeah, but the guy said that and all this. So they'll take a very specific part of their entire argument and put it through a very rigorous scientific process, which is fair. My problem is, if we were to take that rigorous process and put the original theory in it, it gets dismantled.
Yeah.
So how come we are pounding with a strong, rigorous scientific process, the new theory, but not the old one? Shouldn't we first put the old theory through today's rigorous scientific processes with the tools that we have and see if it still holds water?
Yeah.
And yet, no one wants to do it.
Yeah.
No one is touching them. That's what I found the weirdest thing.
The change in that era, I'll describe briefly, was what often I see was that science went from a place, something that happened in testing laboratories, where testing of science was done.
With a bunch of autistic people never coming out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like,
and what
style.
happened is, we'll get into this at a different point, but what happened during that time is there was a big rise in financial incentives for science,
especially in Germany.
Especially in Germany. First off, Germany before World War I and kind of in World War II had the market
science.
covered on science. Chemicals specifically, not
physics.
just chemistry, but chemicals and pharmaceuticals.
And physical. Einstein.
And so post World War I, a lot of countries all over the world really noticed that, oh shit, we need medicine. Like, we just had all of our medical skills tested in the field with injuries, infections, all that stuff. And there was a huge need for this. Yeah. And so science started moving towards that. We need chemicals. We need chemistry. And then there was a financial incentive. And you see that shift from testing laboratories to research facilities that are researching things to be products.
The evil was planted.
Yeah.
I do believe so. We'll make a podcast on this.
But where does this go for you as far as like...
So Carl Friston was... So I had... If I looked at a father figure spiritually and intellectually, I would look at Schrödinger and Carl Friston for me. Because... And Schrödinger being the first, he introduced the idea, being so scared about it, that life has an intent. Like, this is the core issue here, is that just like the Germans had physics and biology from, like, medicine, all that stuff, like you can see Victorian England, so the Victorian, era, in English biology was really ruling everything, Darwin, all that stuff. And they fought very, very hard to take the mysticism out of it to the point of to a fault, really, where...
And mysticism really meaning anything that they couldn't quite measure at that time.
Right, they could not understand. And so they had that almost like realism that turned into pessimism. If it's not something that is right here, then it doesn't exist, but almost to a fault. It almost became like a religious cabal at mysticism. Lamarck, the famous French scientist, had a fight with Darwin saying and again, like evolution takes jumps over Darwin. That was it's very incremental. At the end, Lamarck was right. And this is the problem. Lamarck was right on certain things, but wrong about others. How could it be otherwise? They didn't have the tools to, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, for example, didn't have the microscopes.
Well, you'll
strong enough to be able to know whether they were right or wrong.
And you can pigeonhole a man. We've seen this often in people we talk about before, where you'll pigeonhole a man's life's work over the one or two things he got wrong.
But of course they do that. And then they take that to, it's capital, it's venture capitalism, where they bring an outlier, they take the product, they kill him, push him aside, and keep the product.
And then wonder why it's...
Right. Yeah. But this is, and then of course, venture capitalists just want the immediate stuff. So that's, science has a problem with venture capitalism that seems to be, that exploded in the 1920s, especially Germany and that part. After World War I, it's anyway. So we'll do a podcast about this because it's very interesting from a system perspective. But anyway, so Schrödinger introduced that idea that there is an intent. Life fights entropy. And this is something that, so he did it from physics side of it, because Schrödinger was a guy who came, quantum mechanics, the wave function. But he tried to link the quantum mechanics with biology to the point where he surmised the existence of DNA 10 years before it was found out. So the biologist actually followed the roadmap he provided to find DNA. So it's the importance of that book, of that concept. And in it, hidden in it, he talks about cell biology. Right, so, and then if you remember, like I sent you, and I think I posted that one about Carl Friston when he explained the free energy principle. Remember the ink that comes in and out? And so the beginning of the talk really starts by saying, look, you need to differentiate when you talk about something, what that thing is versus what it is not. If there was no barrier, there would be nothing, because everything would be everything, right? Yeah. Right, so it was the same thing. So we have to start by saying, like, a cell is what the other thing is not.
Everything around it is.
Right, exactly. And so there was an entire thing there where the membrane of the cell becomes a Markov blanket, and then all that stuff, right? So that means that the inside of the cell is not the outside of the cell. Right, that sounds obvious, right? Yeah. Well, you're going to see that it is, in biology, it isn't. And so, but the entire thing, that means that through processes that have been proven mathematically, Carl Friston was showing that the inside of the cell fights entropy, the entropy imposed by the disorder imposed by the outside world. So the job of the cell really is to fight the disorder imposed by the outside world. That's what makes the cell alive. Yeah. The cell is alive because it's
not scattered into the rest of the
exactly universe. And so its free energy is higher because it fights entropy, it fights disorder. So that's
it's interesting. On a cellular level, if something cannot maintain that difference, it is no longer alive immediately.
That's the difference.
Right?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's going to be the same thing with you.
Right.
You turn into a fucking goo, spray it all over the fucking universe. You are no more.
Exactly. And so I'm going to go into that because it matters very much so. But that process has been, and Carl Friston said it, where he says, like, if it applies to the brain as a Bayesian engine, but then therefore it should apply to all forms of life. Therefore, a single cell, it applies to a single cell. I think that one is right. Yeah. That concept has not got into biology yet, especially when it comes to the cell. You've seen that on that cancer argument.
Was that as far as he theorized then? Is with that cell, that difference? Was that about as far as...
Right, he said it should apply to everything. That is said out loud.
Yeah.
My guess is that man has ideas that he's not talking about for many good reasons, because of fear of being ostracized or stuff like that. But I'm sure just from a principle alone, he could guess... He already guessed a lot of the stuff.
The rest,
He inferred a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about. Okay. So now I want to take it to the cell biology, right? Why? Because of all the energy pathways that I've been talking about lately. Lactate as a fuel and things like that. So if I started to look at muscle recovery and all that stuff. Right, all right. So I'm going to put the free energy principle on pause, but it's coming right back. Right, so I'm looking at all the energy pathways and then lactate as a fuel and everything. So to produce lactate, you need glycolysis. All right, so I'm starting to look at glycolysis, glyconeogenesis, all that stuff. And I found, so again, and every time I hit heat, every single time there's that stuff about temperature that I find very interesting because it reminds me of entropy every time. And what you see again, like then you have the futile cycle, like, glucose to lactate to glucose, and it produces ATP. And so, okay, so then you start to look at ATPs to create heat. So what is exactly ATP for? And so then, and then what is about that muscle recovery about? When you look at muscle recovery, it's telling you that you need the lactate because of lowering the pH level, which improves it, because recovery is all about the membrane of the cell, basically the activity of the muscle, electrical activity of the muscle and stuff like that. So you start to go, okay. And then you see adrenaline helps with the sodium-potassium pump, Na plus, K plus pump. So I'm like, all right, so I start to go into that one. And what you see is that there's a differential, right? You have a lot of the K plus, so potassium ion versus, so a lot of it in the cell, more than outside the cell. Right, and then you have way less sodium ion than outside the cell. So that creates a voltage differential. Remember epigenetics?
Yep.
That's what the electric field is technically it's not electricity, it's voltage differential. Right. So there's something there. And so what they call the membrane pump theory is that the potassium gets out and then the ATP gets the energy to activate a pump to get the potassium back in. Right, and then that's the whole stuff. So it's sodium, potassium, that back and forth, that there's a pump to take one versus the other and to go back to that voltage differential. So fatigue at some point was seen as the potassium getting outside of the cell, and then you need the ATP to create the energy of the pump to put it back in. Right, so what we're saying really is that the interior of the cell, water-wise, because it's mostly water, is the same water as outside the cell, right? And all there is ions back and forth, right? And I was like, okay, all right, so there must be, whatever. And then you keep on going. And then suddenly, there's a guy named Gilbert Ling coming about who start to talk about this and goes, wait. Well, he does that as a grad student. He was like, let's calculate how much ATP I would need to get that potassium-sodium pump going.
So did the full math.
Thermodynamics of it. Yeah. And he finds that we will need about, I think he said 300 times the amount of ATP that glycolysis produces.
Yeah.
Right, so that'd be kind of a problem. Right, you have to understand, this is the potassium-sodium pump, this is Nobel Prize.
Which is also kind of a foundational thing, one of those flags in the ground that now we go forward based on this assumption.
Unquestioned.
Yeah.
And Ling comes about and challenges that, saying, well, that doesn't work. Plus, you have another problem. If you have a pump for potassium-sodium, then you have a pump for the other ones as well. And there's a lot of pumps. So now the energy requirement for that is monstrous. And so now you start to run into a major problem with that.
Well, and this is the math and the thermodynamics side of things is interesting because that's not disputed. As far as as a fundamental truth, I don't think anyone's arguing the law of thermodynamics.
No, that you can't.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I just don't think that that's one of these sacred cows that is a false assumption because it has been very much run through.
It's like entropy always increases. Like you're going to have a hard time getting at that one.
I think it's too fundamental to have wrong at that point.
But what is interesting about that is thermodynamic is never considered biology. You cannot have lactic acid in a body that is kept between 6 and 7.5 on a pH curve. So there is no lactic acid either from a thermodynamics perspective. So you never run into biologists that can do thermodynamics. Ling could. Yeah. And so that's why he developed the whole thing. So what he came up with was the idea that old school idea for 19th century of the protoplasm. I don't know if you remember that one.
I don't know if I remember that.
There was two fields. There was the protoplasm, which means that it can be like it's almost like a semi-solid liquid. It's kind of in between. Can be a gel, can be a little bit more viscous, but basically there's the inside of the cell that interacts with the outside of the world. At the time, there's no free energy principle and that stuff. But basically, there's a protoplasm that is the base of life. That was late 19th century, and they threw a microscope and a cell, but that experiment was actually had his own flaws. The guy was like, no, that's not what happens. What happened is the liquid that is the same on both sides, and he proved that the liquid at the same with the same liquid on certain level, and so all you see the difference is the ions going back and forth.
Therefore, the protoplasm could not be
right because of that one experiment.
Same.
Because of that one experiment. But that one experiment, the problem is it can either be the exception or the rule. Mm-hmm. Turn out it was the exception, but it didn't matter because that one thing pushed the entire field to shell, protoplasm, and go with the pump. And we have not turned around since then. And it was done again. I think this one was 1930. And we didn't turn. And the Nobel Prize on potassium sodium was, I think, 1957, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. And so, and out of that one experiment, even though there was a lot of stuff done for protoplasm, they chose that route. Because protoplasm, like that's where like we'll have podcast about it, like, and then it's only my opinion, but there is there is that refusal to look at at a possibility of intent. Mm-hmm. I do believe that is the core of the problem that physicists and mathematicians have no issues with, but biologists do, which tells me biologists are not the best scientists out there. You cannot be a good scientist without some form of creativity. Look at Einstein, look at Schrodinger. You're going to have to hunt for...
Because there's an art in asking the right questions.
Exactly.
That's why, I think science is an execution of a lot of processes, and it can seem, quote, scientific. Right. But I really think that the art in it is asking the right questions. And I think that there's a lot of that's lost on people.
In biology, anyway. So Gilbert Ling goes at the whole process and starts to bring quantum mechanics into it. And his entire thing was to say that the protoplasm does exist. He called it nanoplasm, right? And then that the whole point is that the inside of the cell is not the same as the outside of the cell. And then the back and forth between because then it gets into water, like so certain properties of water have to be there. What's it called? The block wave? Anyway, there's a name sorry, I forgot, but there's a name for it. And then that's the interaction between those two that creates the energy necessary for the stuff to go. So there is no energy necessary for a pump. That really what you have is you have a rest state for the cell. And in a rest state, you have less entropy. Everything is ordered. So that the water inside the cell is in a more ordered form. Right. So that goes far this way. But basically the idea is the water inside... there's less entropy within the cell. It's order. And then you have the active state where all that gets messed up from the active. So entropy increases, right? And the role of ATP in the cell in very specific cases is to actually bring the cell to a lower entropy level.
Basically, it's to get there and almost restore homeostasis, if you will, or just get back to the rest state. You know what I'm saying?
To the rest state, yes, exactly, in that
level.
sense, getting back to the rest state. That's what the true job of that ATP, that energy, is to bring an energy in to go back to the rest state. So in that sense, like that ATP would be like neg entropy would be life, basically, because that would be the entire idea. And suddenly the thermodynamics starts working. So that there is no membrane pump theory, that it's wrong. There, it's not about the sodium in and out, the potassium in and out, or
it's not the mechanism, it's the purpose.
Right. That's so ATP is not produced to reinstall that pump. ATP is actually a measure of is there to restore a lower level of entropy within the cell, so that the main action of the cell that brings life, that brings energy, everything, is actually a quantum mechanical principle that Schrodinger explained. And he actually quotes him and explain how all that stuff is. So now, I have no doubt that guy made mistakes here and there. How could he not? He went by himself for 50 years or more, 60 years, trying to create an entire unifying theory for the life of the cell. There is no question he fucked up some of the stuff, because he's by himself. How could he not? How could he be any different?
Well, and you have an industry that has sacred cows all over the place that you can't touch.
So I'm sure some of the stuff they start to dismantle him on that, but it doesn't. What I find very interesting with all this and very strange is that no one is taking this argument about thermodynamics toward the pump, or even that scientific rigor that they're putting his stuff through. No one is putting the original idea through. The pump was creating out of a very specific experiment. Let's take that experiment. Let's do it again, and then see if and then let's take, because he did it with a very specific cell. Let's take other cell. Let's redo this because we need to do it. It's not so, because imagine, then it would mean that the life of a cell is different than what we understand. That 100 years ago, for many different reasons, we misinterpreted completely the energy system of the cell. So literally the block of life for us as human being. So that would affect glycolysis, because then the ATP becomes something else. So remember on the futile cycle? So the futile cycle, like I was saying, is glucose to lactate to glucose. The only idea was to produce ATP. Yeah. To restore a lower level of entropy to the body then. And then suddenly you start to see things very differently. Now you go into cancer. We know that Warburg effect, right? Cancer is fueled by metabolism where oxidation becomes a problem. And then a lot of it is just glucose-based and stuff like that. Yeah. That's the whole Warburg effect and all that stuff. So that's why glycolysis is a problem. MIR378, like you start to see that whole issue. Right, so the futile cycle is started again in the same stuff to go to our lipolysis to produce the ATP. So then that reminds you of Paul Davis. That's saying that cancer is actually the ultimate defense of life. So that means that cancer will be the ultimate way to bring a lower level of entropy, which takes you back to the futile cycle with MIR378, and suddenly you can link everything as cancer as a way to lower entropy. So you're creating so much entropy in your body. Cancer is the ultimate form to fight that. So then you see cancer, you see everything in a completely different way. And that's why then glycolysis and the Warburg effect would make so much sense, because ATP is just being produced to lower that. So producing too much entropy, too much glycolysis, too much futile cycle in that sense would be a reason for cancer. So cancer not as an evil, just as a way to stay alive. That goes awry. That goes completely sideways. So back, cancer and metabolism. That would fundamentally change the way we look at cells, because we're looking at it without the free energy principle, without that idea of intent from Schrödinger. I mean, we look at it in there's water in and out, and there's just ions back and forth. Instead of never being able to explain what is life, where is the intent of fighting entropy coming from? Those are questions we can't answer, but Carl Friston
those are the right questions.
Those are the right questions. Exactly, right. Exactly. So anytime any scientist started to go there, he got blasted into oblivion. There are sacred cows, and the membrane pump is one. And Link, to me, I did not do the math myself on the thermodynamics because I'm not good enough. Like he goes into stuff like that goes way past me. Like on that one, and I don't know that I want to go there.
Yeah, well, there's a measure. Some of that is the problem, because it's what people do with a lot of this science is just like that. Right? I can't do that math. I got to trust that guy did. And that's what I think. It's a very common thing going forward. Much like with a lot of these sacred cows, is people will say, well, that guy figured it out. I'll just move forward based on this assumption. There's no reason for me to learn how my cell phone works. I just fucking use it.
Right, exactly. Right. But remember like that cancer guy who was saying, like he's 88 now and he's one of the fathers of molecular biology, who was saying like 2 months ago I had to learn about the Krebs cycle.
Yeah. He's like, I never thought.
I would need to do this.
Yeah.
Right. That tells you where we are right now. But imagine if fundamentally, because of, for different reasons in the 1920s and 30s, we looked fundamentally at the body the wrong way. The bias within those scientists were so strong that they could not come to the right conclusion.
There's a reason we have no real decent conclusion with cancer up until the point where then we started getting to finally be able to map the human genome over the course of the last 20 years, 20, 30 years.
And he ddidn't do shit.
During that time, we hoped and hoped and hoped that there's a gene turned on and off. And it's like, and in the end, so that's what that guy had said too. He's like, "Fuck, I got to go back and learn the Krebs cycle."
That it's because it's about metabolism.
He said we thought we'd get to this gene mapping thing and we'd know, and we don't fucking know. So now they have to go all the way back and start to rework assumptions on everything
on
to try to figure it out.
But so Ling is the only one that brought that idea of entropy into cell biology, and to him. And I'm sure he made mistakes, but to him, he provided a unified theory for the energy system that sustains the cell. And so then you would have Carl Friston, you would have Schrödinger, and you would have Ling linking what I believe is the truth of this universe. Maybe not the other ones, but this one, this is the life between, difference between life and non-life is the capacity to fight entropy. And whether you go Friston, whether Schrödinger, doesn't matter. But I believe Ling put that into the cell life. And so therefore that the membrane pump, like there is a pattern to what Ling is saying where I'm going like, this has to be true. There is no other way but this. And I think he saw the same thing, honestly. The guy is brilliant. Like he goes into stuff where it's way past me. Dude is he's a biologist and understands statistical mechanics. And he starts to go into he wrote different paper, but like by the seventh line of the paper, he starts to quote Boltzmann. I was like, oh, I love you already. Ludwig Boltzmann, like he's the one who invented statistical mechanics, but he's the one who said entropy almost always increases. Like he died of suicide, but he was a genius, just a completely chaos. Yeah. He was about chaos and stuff like that. Like he was a great thinker. Yeah. Like Leonard Susskind talks about him all the time. Like it's Boltzmann brain. Remember like Guardian of the Galaxy 2?
No.
Did you see Guardian of the Galaxy 2? Yeah. But like the dude, like the father, he's a big brain.
Oh, yeah.
And he's alone in the universe. Well, that's Boltzmann's brain. He was saying like the statistical stuff and everything, they just be one brain, because it's way more likely to have one brain than billions of one.
To one.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was funny when he puts one brain. That's what this is. It's Boltzmann's brain. Anyway, there's some geeks writing those things. So I was the only one laughing in the movie theater. But just Google Boltzmann's brain. You'll see what I mean. But imagine the fundamental truth to this. Yeah. If Schrödinger is right, if Carl Friston is right, then what Ling is talking about, maybe he made mistakes in shaping it, but fundamentally what he's talking about has to be right. That means the membrane pump from a thermodynamic perspective
doesn't add up.
And no one has disproven that. No one is doing the math on it. Yeah. This is the very strange thing. Like this is not, they catch him on other stuff, but no one is looking at the math. And if you need the math for that pump, you need, by the way, that means all pumps needs to also have the energy, and it doesn't seem to add up. You're asking a lot of ATP.
Yeah.
So the consequences are dire on that one. Because that makes me look at ATP completely differently.
Yeah.
So not in all things, because it doesn't work in a red globule, is something different. The red blood cells are a bit different because they go hemoglobin, ATP there doesn't act like that. But
I think to assume that one thing being wrong is going to be the key for everything is a little bit different.
But so let's just put the original experiment for the membrane pump through the same scientific rigor. Let's see what happens. Let's redo the experiment, right? With different cells, and let's see.
And I think it's just a matter of learning to understand better at this point. So if that is wrong, then now you learn what's right.
Yeah.
If it is right, you might understand it better. But instead, you just move forward on the assumption, which I think is a huge mistake.
Touching. Yeah. We're not touching it. And so, but how are we going to get at cancer if we can't understand the pump correctly? Because again, cancer and glycolysis, like we know, like we saw during cancer, we saw an activation of the glycolytic genes. Mm-hmm. So we know it's in there.
Yeah.
It's metabolism, man. And metabolism comes down to the fundamental. Look at her. To the fundamental cell life and everything. So suddenly muscle recovery, producing ATP, that makes sense. Muscle recovery. Yeah. So muscle recovery is the cells going back to the rest phase, and that's what they need ATP for, is to go back to rest. So the rest versus active state, which reminds you of the breathing of the ink, that Carl Friston was talking about, active versus sensory state versus active state, inside versus outside. So you're going back always toward the same thing. It's very interesting. Anyway,
well,
that will be the subject for now.
Yeah. All right, guys, thanks for listening. I can't do the whole read for you.
No. So what you'll do is you'll record one, and then that way
I'll record a loop for sure for the shorts.
Yeah.
All right, guys. See you next week. next time, whatever.
Yeah.
If you want to support the podcast, head on over to podcast.strongfit.com. There you could donate or join the YouTube channel. Also, go to strongfit.com. There you're going to find our online courses, education, and all of our seminar dates should be there as well. Head on over to strongfitlibrary.com to keep up to date on everything Julien's been working on. And follow StrongFit1 on Instagram and Tyler F. and Stone.